Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Monday morning live stream. I've made a change here, and hopefully the sound is much, much better. I'm getting rusty. I guess this is testament to the importance of daily practice. Okay, well, I see enough signs that everything sounds good, so beginning again. Good morning and welcome back to our Monday morning coffee live stream. Good to see everybody. How many people we have? 53. So it looks like most everybody made it back. It feels like an eternity, or maybe even another life, since I've done the coffee time with people. A lot's happened in the last week for me. It's been a very eventful, momentous week. I had not left the Hermitage since the pandemic started. Last time we met in this forum, and Tuesday last week, myself and the other monks had the opportunity to go into Portland to visit a very dear friend who's been working with cancering and was in the last stages of her dying process. Many of you know her, Karen Miller, very, very sweet, dear friend of the Hermitage and the Hermitage community, and has been up to Birken many times, so our Birken friends, some of you will have known her. And it's the first time I had been out of the monastery since mid or late March. So that was quite eventful. And then, of course, going to visit such a good friend in that condition was incredible, an incredible blessing to be with her and Bob, who's here today, and her family, and to sit together and offer some chanting and some encouragement. And certainly it's still very much on my mind. Quite a big event in one's life to lose somebody and also to be with somebody at that time. And while there's sadness, I've always been inspired by how Bob and Karen have worked with this difficult chapter of a person's life. And in some sense, I have a lot more comfort and inspiration having been through that process with them. And Karen looked absolutely beautiful when we went to visit her. And she looked like she was near her death. And that natural event that all of us will meet one day. And so it's when somebody dies in a relatively calm and prepared way, surrounded by family and friends and loved ones, it gives us hope. And there's a place in the suttas where the Buddha says, if it wasn't for death, there would be no Dhamma, or no reason for the Dhamma. And this is one of the reasons why death is such an important kind of theme in Dhamma practice. So that's something to consider. It's like a little Theravadan koan. If there was no death, there would be no reason for the Dhamma. In some sense, death is the most unsatisfactory of our life experiences, whether it's the death of a friend or a loved one, or our own death. And even the thought of it, the psychological ramifications of not just the death of our body, but the death of that which is born, including conditions, the cycles of birth and death, how it's bound up with the other forms of suffering and dukkha, like separation from the loved. We find ourselves endlessly sort of fighting in a way, struggling, scanning, trying to make the most of our life and find happiness and satisfaction. And even when we find it, some part of us knows it won't last. And some part of us hasn't yet found the answer to that dilemma of life. And in some way, this is why the theme of aging, illness, and death, I think, sits quite central to a lot of the themes of Dhamma practice. And indeed, it's important and even relatively minor relief just to recollect that death in and of itself is unsatisfactory. I mean, it's painful, it's unwanted, it's unwished for, and it's unsatisfactory. And that's one of the most important dimensions of what the Buddha is talking about when he points to the noble truth of dukkha, the dilemma that is most central to our emotional sense of well-being, is this struggle to find satisfaction. And in the main, the ways that we seek that in a human life are imperfect. We're trying to find satisfaction somewhere over there on the horizon, in the future, or trying to find it in the here and now by holding on to things which are inherently unsatisfactory, or by manipulating and trying to change things that are inherently can't bring us the satisfaction, sense of completion that we long for. And such a huge part of finding our way out of that conundrum is to, in a kind and loving and clear way, start to discover the truth of how things are dukkha, things are unsatisfactory, and stop trying to pretend or make them otherwise. And the whole of the Buddhist path and the Buddhist training sort of helps support us in doing that in a way that is grounded and gentle, and complete, so that with the maturation and the development of the path, we ultimately find things that are more satisfying, more deeply satisfying, and develop the strength of heart, the serenity, and the clarity to eventually abide in the realm of and with that which is inherently unsatisfactory, but with no suffering. And a big part of it is because we're not trying to find satisfaction in the things that can't satisfy. Things have been relatively busy. Besides that, out here at the Hermitage, and but I have had a little extra time to do some walking in the woods and a little reading. And the first signs of fall are coming. Some of the big leaf maples, their leaves have already dried up and have started falling and blowing around. And while it still very much feels like midsummer, the signs of fall and change are on their way, and been able to spend a bit more time out in the forest. And yesterday, looping through the forest on one of my walks, I kind of determined to really try to stay with the breath in a way that I often don't. Oftentimes my walks in the forest are a bit more unfocused and casual. But I'd say probably the highlight of my day yesterday was about an hour stroll up into the forest and around. And part of it was because I wasn't so casual about it. I stayed close to the present moment and with my breath, and found this magical flow of just being with movement and breath in the fresh air, moving through the trees. And there's a great measure of solitude. Nobody else was on the trails, aside from a few skunks and animals and birds. And it was a very meditative walk, and brought me about as much joy and satisfaction as a good meditation would. And part of the answer to living in this realm that is so full of that which is dukkha, or that which is unsatisfactory, is finding ways to reconnect with that which is at least a little bit more satisfactory, and a sense of well-being. And our meditative practices of love and kindness and of the breath, overcoming hindrances and moving to this selfless posture of just being in the present moment, arouses a profound sense of well-being. And even just a little bit of that injected into our day goes a long way towards the frustrations and the challenges and the afflictions that one might face in the day. Oftentimes, think in my morning meditation to challenge myself to find the magic, to find that sort of sense of well-being in the breath or in the meditation, knowing that it's so easy to lose that, and knowing that you're facing a very uncertain set of challenges in the day. And if one can find that in their day, or especially in their morning, it makes the day all that more easy to bear. I often start the day, if I find that sort of sense of well-being that one can find in meditation, that the whole day could be a challenge and fall apart, but at least I had this. At least I had this moment where I felt profoundly well and things seemed okay, unproblematic, spacious. At least I touched a sense of ease. And we need that. emotionally, we need that. And that's a critical kind of part of the mental cultivation that is closely coupled with the serenity of mind that plays a critical role in allowing us to relax and refresh and let go of the obstructions. And then with that, it's like we need a sense of satisfaction, that we need the sense of well-being and satisfaction for us to fully kind of relax and open to the clarity of the present moment, to see ourselves and our lives in a new light. And that is certainly part of the role of serenity. So maybe we'll move to taking some questions. Sharada Barahi. I hope I said your name right. Sharada Barahi. Dear Ajahn, what should one reflect on or do in the last days or hours or moments before death? It's a good question. We put a lot of emphasis on preparing oneself and doing the work before we get to that place, so that it's not a last-minute attempt to sort of gain favorable rebirth or good death. I don't know of a lot of emphasis that's there in the suttas on doing a particular practice or reflecting in a particular way before the end of death. I mean, there's a little bit in the suttas, but it's certainly not a major theme like it might be in other schools of Buddhism or even other religious traditions. So, first and foremost, there is some truth to one oftentimes dies as they live. So the karma and the habits and the strengths that we develop now in our life will most likely have a profound impact on how it is that we die. But it's interesting. I mean, there's certain things that we're still holding on to, and maybe as we move closer to the reality and the presence of our final moments, that creates some critical condition or change for us to let go in ways that we haven't previously let go, and for maybe some of the latent goodness and latent insights that we've developed to come to the fore. There's various places in the suttas where the Buddha talks very, in a very strong way, about just how much benefit there can be and how much merit can be generated from even a flash or a finger snap of loving kindness. And even a moment spent in the serenity of the jhanas is said to have a conditioning effect, not just for the end of life, but future births. So, and I think some of those teachings might speak to the death and dying kind of process. It's like maybe one has had very genuine and pure, lucid experiences of the goodness and the power of loving kindness, but then lives in a way that's distant from that. And then in their final moments, somehow they have access to that. The same is true, especially of selflessness, whatever insights we've developed into the truth of non-self and how that relates to the processes of dukkha and suffering. If they're deep and genuine, they leave a lasting impression on the mind. And it can be that, we're not completely developed in our practice or enlightened, that we live at some distance from those. We're not able to be our better selves, is what I often say, because of more temporal choices we're making or conditions that we're dealing with. And so it may be at the time of death that the conditions have changed and we're more easily able to sort of reconnect with those things. And those are some of the things that I would recommend that people reflect on in the last part of their dying process. Loving kindness, serenity, and selflessness. And I would add to that the goodness that we've done in our lives. Either good deeds in the world or profound acts of giving, raising children, engaging in loving relationships, doing good work in the world. Important part of generating merit is remembering and recollecting those things and even delighting in those things. And as we approach the final days of our life, it's good to strengthen the practice of recollecting those things and delighting in them, rejoicing in them. We might have a habit of trying not to remember those, don't want to be attached to them, or we don't want to be self-important and proud. But the Buddha encourages recollecting those things and delighting in them. They bring joy to the mind. And joy can then support the movement towards tranquility and serenity, samadhi, and equanimity. That pathway is repeated over and over and over in the Buddhist teachings. So trying to arouse a sense of well-being and joy and happiness is integral to preparing the mind for tranquility and samadhi. And those things support wisdom and insight. If I had to choose just one, I would focus the bulk of my attention on trying to abide with the abiding sense and perception of no self and non-self. How do you think you would have handled this loss hadn't you done all the work you've done? And what would you still like to improve to make it more manageable? Well, in short, I think I would have been overwhelmed with grief. Maybe even overwhelming grief and sadness. And what would I still like to improve? I could still strengthen an even more profound sort of sense of the Dhamma, I would say. And maybe have a much greater aptitude or clarity to be able to share that with friends that are facing the end of their life and supporting them and their family. I think that's one of the things I'd like to improve the most. It's sometimes difficult to know what to say or even how to express. Like, why come and sit here to do this even? Like, my mind is indecisive jumble, and I feel wildly incoherent before the stream starts. And I'm not sure that it gets all that much better when it starts, but like, um, I still find it incredibly difficult to speak about my own path of practice in a way that I feel is cogent or as clear as maybe useful as it could be. So that's the thing I would like to improve the most. Happy Monday. In line with why is this going well? When I feel aversion or dukkha, I say to myself, bring it on. It absorbs me into noting the hindrance and feels good. Why is that? Well, I can only make a guess, but one might be because you've strongly sort of just put aside the aversion, like you're resolving some of the aversion by saying, bring it on. You're welcoming it. And part of what magnifies our suffering is feeling that it shouldn't be. Like we're lamenting the state of suffering that we're facing, or the pain or the challenges that we're kind of facing in life, and thinking that this shouldn't be. Why me? We get stuck in a kind of craving and a longing for it to be ever other, or for it to go away. And that very aversion and those thoughts that this shouldn't be happening, life should be easier, and the longing for it to be different than it is, or easier than it is, um, just adds dukkha. This is like the simile of the second arrow that we talk about. So bring it on. Bring it on could be a very skillful means for you just to very quickly resolve at least some of that drift towards aversion and frustration. So it might be a very quick and effective shorthand for you to resolve that. I have something that's a little similar to that, where I try to just reflect on how it is that I probably wouldn't learn very much if I wasn't suffering. And so trying to, we don't need to go looking for suffering, but on some level you do want to you do want to learn how not to create this extra suffering reacting to the states that we find ourselves in. And in a sense, welcoming the suffering that is there, or not moving into anger and aversion because one is challenged, is emotionally, I think, important condition. So, and sometimes for me, I just think of suffering as a teacher, and also, okay, thank you. I am not free from this. There's more to learn, more to do, more to develop. And the fact that I'm suffering over this, it's uncovering undone work. So, and I try to reflect on it sometimes in that way to check the drift to aversion and frustration, but then also to support the motivational structure that's necessary to kind of keep learning and developing. Good morning, Abby. Ajahn, what if a person has lived a loving, generous life and then dies suddenly from an accident, illness, or violence? How can we view these conditions? Well, with birth is death, and we will die in some way, and that's just intrinsic to the human condition. So I don't know if your question is talking about, is it fair that somebody dies that way, and maybe they don't have the space and the time and presence to kind of die in a reflective way. I mean, it's really hard to say one is good or bad. You really don't know the mind of another, and it's hard to fathom sort of how the death process works for somebody who dies so suddenly. I know there's great concern for that in Thailand, where I trained as a monk, and there's special death rituals for people that die in very unexpected and violent ways, because there's a fear that the person will be in a ghost-like state or a confused sort of state, dying at an unexpected and surprising time. And there's a whole culture of ghosts and worrying about ghosts. So they want to make sure their relative doesn't become a ghost and haunt them, or even more beautiful version of that is they don't want to see their loved ones and trapped in a ghost-like state. But some of the karma of being a human being is that we're subject to these things, and it could be based on past karma, but also some of it's karma of being a human being. It's a very insecure and uncertain sort of realm, and so we can be the victim of an accident or surprise illness or violence. And it's not necessarily me, our mind, and not necessarily we shouldn't really think of it through a hyper-personalized lens. And there's a tendency sort of in the Buddhist world to do that. People want to personalize karma and make these things all about, or tell stories and create a justification for things happening based solely on karma. And I don't think that is correct. There still is luck and chance and misfortune and laws of the physics and genetics and just the frailty of being a human being. Do you still feel the sadness of the loss? If you do, how do you live it differently? To be honest, I'm not really feeling a lot of sadness. I'm not really. I feel a lot of love and delight in having known Karen and known how she's affected and inspired others. And my mind's mostly focused on that and feeling that. Sadness could arise. So I'm not attaching to that as self or living in some sort of sense that, oh, there's no sadness, or I won't feel sadness. It could come. It could come at any time. And that's one of the interesting things about the mourning process and loss of a loved one. Oftentimes the emotions play out in a most unexpected way. And my encouragement is to kind of release any of the ideals and expectations that you have for how that's going to play out and what you should or shouldn't be feeling. But don't abandon the Buddha's encouragement to practice right effort and Um, to encourage, to nurture, or to wallow in sadness or depression is not, it's ultimately not skillful. Sometimes we can't help ourselves, but we should seek a way to let those feelings arise and cease, and to bring them to resolution in appropriate ways. And some of that can be refocusing the mind. So, if sadness does arise, say later today or tomorrow or next week, I'll mindfully receive that sort of experience and then bring it to resolve. Probably through some more loving and inspired sort of remembrance or reflection. Good morning, Nadine. Radiating equanimity as a divining abiding. My screen's so far away from me this morning that the focus isn't super clear for me. Radiating equanimity as a divining abiding. I think you mean divine abiding. Can you describe radiating that to oneself? It seems different from radiating metta to oneself. I think it feels different in my experience, but not all that different. It's like I really consider the Brahma Viharas as like a very, like a family, a tightly knit family of loving emotions. And equanimity is the clear-headed, lucid love in that family, sort of grounded in wisdom and understanding. But I still feel it as related to, so it has a slightly different personality, maybe, I guess you could say, or texture to it, but radiating that to oneself doesn't feel all that different. So, and, for me, sometimes there's very much still the sense of the body, this mind, the space that it inhabits, and one's generating that experience of equanimity and suffusing the mind and the body with that. Sometimes the sense of the body falls away, and one is just focused on the pure experience and feeling of equanimity and just radiating it out in space, or just, if the mind's very still and in experiencing a very strong state of equanimity, you're just with it, and the mind is just energetic and fully immersed and absorbed in this abiding of equanimity and the equanimous heart. Good morning, Trevor. Ajahn, how does Buddhism view the actions of those dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's? Well, I think the short answer is they're not self. And I don't know if I can speak for all of Buddhism, but that's my sort of sense of it. And there's some kind of interesting experiences and anecdotes with aged people or even aged monks in Thailand. Or one elderly monk that I met once here in the States, who I spent just a little bit of time around him when he was clearly going through some dementia. I don't know what his particular diagnosis was, but he just beamed with kind of loving kindness most of the time I was around him. It was very inspiring that one might not be in full control of some of their kind of cognitive faculties, I think there's a tendency to want to think of the mind free from suffering and the arahant as this kind of omniscient super being, and we might misattribute enhanced powers of every dimension of cognitive ability to somebody. But and certainly it probably helps many kind of cognitive faculties to be completely beyond suffering. It's such a tremendous burden on the mind and the heart. But in its essence, we're really just talking about this dimension of not suffering. It's a spiritual, emotional, psychological, if you will, dimension of life. And it doesn't mean one's super intelligent or super talented in all the kind of ways that human beings are talented. So there's a few comments Ajahn Chah made towards the end of his life about not being in full control. Something about not being able to speak the way he would have liked or could have in previous years or something. I can't remember clearly the story. There's just a faint kind of memory of him making comments as he was observing. And I can't remember how old he was when he actually had his first profound kind of medical event that led to his eventual deep, almost coma-like state that he lived in for the last period of his life. But in several of his Dhamma talks that have been translated into English, there's little hints or signs as he's reflecting on his aging process and ill health kind of creeping in on him in what I believe would have been his 50s, maybe late 50s, early 60s. I'm not sure the exact dates of those talks. So, but to return to your question, Trevor, the Buddhism I'm most conversant with, I think would see these as not self. So, and conditioned. Certain cognitive abilities arise, exist for a period of time with supporting conditions, and cease. So, good morning, Charles. In some aboriginal cultures, when a person dies, the group gathers. Each person names a virtue of the deceased that they then vow to live forward in their honor, saying hello again. Huh. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that with us. Okay, well, it looks like I've reached the end of the questions for once. Unbelievable. So, okay, friends. Well, I think I will wrap this up for today. Good to see so many people coming back. What do we have? 74 in all, last time I looked. So I will be here again next Monday for the morning coffee stream. And I forget what day of the week that is, but we're getting close to resuming some more daily live streaming. So I better catch up. There's still some things I wanted to prepare before that happens. So yeah, it's nice to see you back, Adil, in the chat. And yes, as Eleanor's noted, August is almost over. So, okay, friends. I'm sure it will seem like another lifetime and another eternity till we return to next Monday and the morning coffee time. But in between then and now, have a good life or lives and make the most of it. And take up that challenge to find a profound sense of well-being, hopefully sooner than later in your day. It goes a long way to dealing with that which is dukkha and that which is unsatisfactory in the life of a human being. So, till next time, be well, friends, and I'll see you later.